Hello, welcome to TAMIU Green Talk, an environmental studies initiative podcast. I'm your host, Sean Jimenez, and a communication student here at TAMIU. I'm joined by Dr. Kyle Breen today, an assistant professor of sociology. Dr. Breen earned his PhD from the Department of Sociology at Louisiana State University. He also holds a graduate minor in environmental science from LSU, and his interests are disaster recovery, environmental justice, and educational inequality. Thank you for joining me today, Dr. Breen.
Thanks so much for having me.
It's great to have you here. Let's get right into it. First, Dr. Breen, as you know, the topic of our episode today is environmental justice. How would you, for our audience, define environmental justice? What do you think our listeners should know about it?
Yeah, that's a really great question. Environmental justice is basically at the kind of root level, the idea that everyone, regardless of race, income, nation of origin, etc., has the right to fair treatment and meaningful involvement when it comes to the environment and the policies and laws that govern protections from environmental hazards. So the big takeaways are that people are treated fairly and no one should bear disproportionate impacts to environmental hazards. And then also communities should be able to participate widely in the kind of policymaking or political process that governs these environmental regulations against hazards.
Mm-hmm. So let's take this into a broader approach so you can kind of give our audience a more look inside to what you're interested in.
Sure.
Could you give us some broad examples of environmental justice issues that our country is currently facing?
Yeah, for sure. I think that the folks listening might be really interested in hearing about kind of the history of environmental justice, where we started and where we are now, especially because I personally like to argue that the broader environmental justice movement actually started here in Texas.
Okay.
Back in the late 70s, there was a court case that was presented from a neighborhood in Houston by Linda McKeever Bullard. And that name might sound familiar to some folks that study environment and environmental social sciences, because Dr. Robert Bullard is widely known as the father of environmental justice. But it was actually his wife that kind of pulled him into it a little bit. And it's because this court case was against, the court case was called Bean versus Southwestern Waste Management Corporation. And this corporation was looking to site a landfill in a predominantly Black middle class neighborhood. And they did not want that landfill there. It was going to be placed near a school. So it ended up being the first court case in the entire nation that looked at environmental racism using civil rights law. So that's kind of where things got kicked off. But you could also say that another example would be Love Canal, which took place in New York. Love Canal was an abandoned canal project near Niagara Falls. It was also the name of a working class community. And essentially what happened in Love Canal was this abandoned canal project was then used by a chemical corporation to dump toxic waste.
Oh, okay.
And so for years and years, in I believe it was the 40s into the 50s, this chemical company dumped nearly 21,000 tons of toxic waste into this abandoned canal project. Eventually they capped that canal, and they sold the land to the Niagara Falls School District and the Niagara Falls School Board. Flash forward, 20 or so years in the 70s, around the same time that that court case was happening in Houston, residents of Love Canal started to experience seemingly inexplicable illnesses.
Okay.
Well, what had ended up happening is that the chemicals from that capped canal project started leaching into the yards and into the school and the playground of that neighborhood.
Wow.
So it ended up being a pretty long and lengthy, not only court battle, but political battle in some ways, that eventually did get resolved with that canal project being labeled as a Superfund site. And it took, many, many years to clean that up. So it was eventually cleaned up, but after many settlements for the health of those residents. And then lastly, the most famous is probably Warren County, North Carolina, where the government of North Carolina was looking for a place to dump a chemical called PCBs, soil laced with those chemicals. And they decided on this community called Afton in North Carolina, which was a rural, poor Black community. This set off widespread protests. And although, some of the legal battles and things like that were ultimately not successful, it really kind of served as a big catalyst for this broader environmental justice movement. So while a number of, the court case in Houston, Warren County, some of those court cases were not super successful, they did start change in those neighborhoods and in kind of legislature. It changed some zoning laws so that landfills in Texas couldn't be placed near schools. Warren County kind of sparked the environmental justice movement.
Yeah.
So the community members that took action really did cause a lot of change.
And do you think that environmental justice is something that we can kind of focus on here in our own community in Laredo? I know you discussed environmental racism and topics along that line. Do you think that there is a space here in Laredo for our community to gain more knowledge on environmental justice and kind of where we can start and what we can do as a community to kind of address any issues we might have here in Laredo?
Yeah, definitely, for sure. There are, speaking about Texas broadly first, and then maybe narrowing it down a little bit to here in Laredo, one of the big kind of environmental justice issues happening in Texas, there are a couple, but one of the big ones deals with the Houston Shipping Channel, a lot of the facilities that are there. There's a really great environmental advocacy group called TEJAS, Texas Environmental Justice Advocacy Services, that I want to shout out, that they do a lot of really great work in Houston and with the neighborhoods near the Houston Shipping Channel. So they do a lot of that. And as we know, being along the border in many border cities and communities like in the Rio Grande Valley and in Brownsville, Laredo, we're dealing with a number of different environmental issues. Water scarcity here in Laredo, we're a major port, right? So we experience a lot of emissions from the hundreds and hundreds of trucks that go in and out of across the bridges every day. And what that ultimately does is puts particulate matter in the air. Particulate matter 2.5, which I'm not an environmental chemist by any means, but these are really, really tiny particles that we breathe in. Something that I've learned, studying some of these things while I've lived in Laredo, is that particulate matter 2.5 is named for the size of the actual particles. So they're 2.5 microns in diameter. And if we think about what can we compare that to, because for all of us, that doesn't really mean anything, right? A strand of your hair is about 50 to 70 microns. So if you divide that, think of how tiny that particulate matter is that's coming from, all of the trucks and the dust and all of that stuff, right? And so we breathe that in, and prolonged exposure can create some, disparate health impacts to us. So in Laredo, we also deal with ethylene oxide, or it's sometimes abbreviated to ETO, because we in town have a commercial sterilizer that is located in the industrial corridor. And the sterilizer is responsible for sterilizing medical equipment using ethylene oxide. And really, they're responsible for a lot of the medical sterilization of the medical equipment that goes all across the country. So we do see some of those emissions from the commercial sterilizer as well. So those are some of the environmental things that we just need to be aware of living in Laredo along the border. You know, that particulate matter that comes from, you know, all of the trucks and the trade that's happening just because of our location as a port city. And then also because we are home to a commercial sterilizer that sterilizes medical equipment using ethylene oxide, we need to be cognizant of that as well.
Definitely. On the topic of ethylene oxide, I actually found it particularly interesting. I did work with a team of journalists from College Station to kind of investigate this in Laredo a little bit more, or do a kind of an update to see where we're at. And we spoke to multiple families within the radius, like the 4-mile radius of the Midwest Sterilization Company. And they have unfortunately suffered from cancer. We spoke to 2 separate families that their main concern was the fear they had, the unknowing, because they weren't aware that what was happening to them could be a result of this sterilization company that was just a couple miles from their house. So I wanted to kind of discuss that with you and ask you, how does Laredo's location on the border and our predominantly Hispanic community affect our exposure to chemical pollutants?
Yeah, so like I mentioned earlier, we're situated in kind of a unique spot, right? Because we are a port city. We're all the way south in the state, and so the bridges see kind of truck after truck come through, which means we're going to see our fair share of emissions from things like particulate matter 2.5. And it's similar with the commercial sterilizer and ETO. The facility in Laredo sterilizes really a gigantic amount of medical equipment that goes to the entire country. It's one of the, I think, one of the largest sterilizers, and so they receive a lot of the equipment that needs to be sterilized for the entire U.S. So we're going to see that play out because of where, you know, Laredo is as a port, but also, you know, this particular facility services the entire country. You know, about a week ago, PBS News highlighted a report that came out of Washington, D.C., stating that the Environmental Protection Agency proposed a rule that would weaken air pollution limits on ethylene oxide.
Wow.
And so in that same PBS report, the change in the rule was deemed unacceptable by the American Lung Association. And if this rule goes into effect and there is that deregulation that takes place, it's something that, you know, the community members should be aware of. They should, you know, be aware that, hey, there could be changes in the level of emissions in the air. You know, that's something that the community members need to recognize, and they should be learning about what the kind of impacts of some of the chemicals that could be, you know, they could be exposed to.
I think a lot of the fear comes from also the unknown. So I wanted to ask if there's any way our community can really engage and better understand these topics, and who can they speak to, who can they voice their concerns to not feel so alone in this.
Yeah, so I'm glad that you brought that up because there is a really great group here in Laredo that does a ton of work on air quality specifically. The Rio Grande International Studies Center, otherwise known as RISC, here in Laredo. They've been doing this work for, I think, last year was their 30th year.
Wow.
And so they've been doing it for, you know, decades, and they've been doing this work. And, you know, combination with air scientists from other parts of the country, from law firms like Earth Justice. They all work together with RISC to put together programming and town halls to make the community more aware. So I would really suggest folks that are interested in some of these topics, whether it's ETO or particulate matter, to get involved with those nonprofit organizations. Same thing with like the clean air, or I think it's Laredo Clean Air Coalition. They do a lot of really great work on air quality. And so getting involved with those groups that have, been doing the work for so long and have that infrastructure can really foster this sense of community about, things that people really care about in terms of the environment. Risk is how I learned about all of those things. So I owe a lot of gratitude to them for kind of bringing me in and making me aware of some of these things. So they also do a binational air council specific to PM 2.5.
Okay.
But that brings together communities from Laredo and Nuevo Laredo across to binationally address some of these issues that citizens are concerned about.
I think RISC is also an organization I would like to shout out as well, because I learned about a lot of this topic through them. I wouldn't have really known much about ethylene oxide and particulate matter without them, because I've also do a lot of environmental journalism, and I'm always contacting them, and they've always been such a big help in like really explaining these things. And you can tell that they want to reach out to the community and really bring this knowledge to the forefront so that as much people as possible can know about it. And I think that's a pretty honorable task. I definitely have learned more than I would have without them.
Yeah, for sure. Because if you go online and like, even if you're just, a citizen that's concerned about something, and you go online and you're like, well, I'm really interested in, air quality or water quality or whatever it is. And you go to the TCEQ, state environmental quality website, you probably don't know where to start.
Yeah,
and it can get kind of confusing, right? And so having an advocate that, can really break it down in an easy way for, folks that are not environmental scientists or environmental chemists. I'm not an environmental chemist, so half the time I go on there, I say, I don't know what I'm looking at, because I deal with more of the human side of things. But it's really great having a team of folks within the community that's rooted in the community that is looking to help make that data and the knowledge accessible and digestible for people living here.
Yeah. I think the big word is community, especially here in Laredo. We're a Hispanic, largely Hispanic population. I think it's important. We really thrive on community, and to have people there that are willing to share this with us makes us feel more at home, I'd say, and gives the community a chance to really discuss with one another and bring these issues forward. Finally, is there anything I haven't covered that you would like to discuss today?
Yeah, so just to kind of broaden us back out, obviously we have environmental issues that we deal with here in Laredo. We talked a little bit briefly about some of the water scarcity that we do deal with here and across Texas. And we also deal with some air quality issues, with particulate matter, and then we do have a commercial sterilization plant that does emit ethylene oxide, but that's not necessarily unique to Laredo. Like, we do deal with these things, but these are things that are happening across the country. And these issues really get at the heart of the environmental justice movement to ensure that everybody has the right to live and breathe and play and enjoy a clean environment, clean environment. And that really gets at the heart of that movement. And I want to talk about a couple of different things that folks may be interested in looking up. The first is a report that was done years and years and years ago.
Okay.
We're coming up on, I believe, the 40th anniversary next year of the initial report, where Dr. Benjamin Chavis of the United Church of Christ put together a report in 1987 on toxic waste and race, which was the title of the report, where they basically did an empirical study looking at the siting of hazardous waste facilities. And what they found was that race was a significant variable when looking at associations with locations of hazardous waste facilities. Dr. Bullard and some other co-authors redid that study 20 years later and found pretty much the same thing, if not things had actually gotten worse. And so that's the first one, and that's speaking specifically to things like landfills or incinerators or things like that. But when we think about things like ethylene oxide, some of those reports are going to be fewer and farther between. One of the more recent reports that I found was from some research done by Adrian Wood and Marilyn Howarth from just a couple of years ago in 2023. And something that they found, and this was published in the journal called Environmental Justice. So hopefully it's accessible for people if they're interested in it. If not, contact me, I'll get it for you. But what they did was they did a case study looking at ETO emitting facilities and found that 23 of 31, so just about 3/4 of those facilities that led to elevated cancer risks are located in environmental justice communities, which they defined using the EPA classifications, which are communities with 20% or more individuals living in poverty and or 30% or more of the population being a member of a minority group. And so this classification system would ultimately classify Laredo as an environmental justice community. So that's what those authors found in their research. And I just wanted to kind of highlight those couple of findings because they're really interesting and, might act as kind of a step forward for community members to learn more about the topic and bring this knowledge to their own social networks, right? Telling their families or their friends or their neighbors about some of these issues so that they can kind of collectively get together to learn about these things and make any change that they may want to make, because that's where it starts a lot of times is at that grassroots level, right? And then, I shouted out so many different names of folks, but there are so many people that are working in this field of study and have been working in it for years and years and years. We mentioned Dr. Bullard and his wife who started that court case, back in the late 70s, which started him getting involved in it. And he's actually at Texas Southern University. I believe he's still there now. And so still fostering, more and more students to learn about these issues and giving lots of talks and things. And then there's, folks like Beverly Wright and Dorsetta Taylor who have done a lot of work in this space, and Wilma Subra, who's a chemist who did a lot of work in the Louisiana chemical corridor, which is referred to commonly as Cancer Alley, that stretch from Baton Rouge to New Orleans. She's done a lot of work there with some of the environmental groups there. So those are just a few names of the folks that are doing this work, but so many people have done this work way longer than I have who have really sparked my own interest in getting involved in studying environment and the inequalities that we face and that certain communities face.
I think the takeaway from that would really be that knowledge is power, especially
for sure. 100%.
Yeah, for all communities, really. I think the more we know, the more we can act on these things and make a better future for ourselves and for generations to come.
definitely, 100%.
For sure. And that's it. Thank you so much for joining me, Dr. Breen.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you to our viewers for listening. Dr. Breen, I wanted to also ask if where our audience can find you or contact you.
Yeah, so you can find me on the TAMIU page for social sciences, or email me at kyle.breen@tamiu.edu. I'm on LinkedIn, or you can find me at Dr. Kyle Breen on Blue Sky as well. I don't post very much there, but usually when it's like conference season and I'm doing things with my natural hazards folks, I get on there every now and then. So that's where you can find where I post some of my work.
Okay, awesome. And that concludes our first TAMIU Green Talk environmental podcast episode. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you would like to follow us on the TAMIU Instagram page, we will be posting there frequently. And our next episode will be focused on another environmental topic. So please tune in. Thank you.